The island awakens. The rain came softly the night they arrived. Mason Reed stood at the edge of the oceanside villa, watching the waves collapse against the rocks below like broken promises. Beside him, Catherine Voss wrapped her arms around herself, still in her wedding dress, the silk clinging to her like a second skin. They had been married for exactly 6 hours. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of exhaustion and joy mixed together. Mason turned to look at her, taking in the way the moonlight caught in her dark curls, the way her lips curved with a smile that made him believe in second chances and forever. He took her hand, leading her inside where the villa glowed with soft amber lights. The bedroom was everything their wedding planner had promised. Soft linens, rose petals scattered across the bed, champagne cooling on the nightstand. Catherine laughed as she noticed the details, that beautiful, uninhibited laugh that had drawn him to her 3 years ago at a gallery opening. She excused herself to shower, and Mason changed into the silk pajamas his sister Isabella had insisted on packing. While waiting, he checked his phone one last time. No messages from the real world, just as they had promised each other. No work emails, no family drama, just the two of them and the sound of the ocean. He set the phone on the nightstand and tried to settle his racing heart. Catherine emerged from the shower like something from a dream, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulders. The way she looked at him then, with vulnerability and desire and complete trust, made Mason forget every doubt he had ever harbored. They came together slowly, tenderly, rediscovering each other as a married couple. Their bodies moved with the confidence of people who had already loved each other through 1,000 nights, yet this felt different, sacred. When she whispered, "I love you," he believed that love could exist without shadows or secrets. Later, as she slept curled against his chest, Mason felt the universe settle into place. This was what he wanted. This was what he had always wanted. The next morning, the world intruded in small ways. Text notifications. A missed call from his office. Catherine turned off her phone completely at breakfast, and Mason followed her lead. They swam in the private pool. They made love again, slower this time, with the sun streaming through open windows. They talked about their future, children, a house with a garden, the life they would build together. On the third night, everything fractured. Catherine was in the shower when Mason noticed her phone, left carelessly on the bedside table. He had no intention of checking it. Truly, he didn't. But a notification buzzed against the glass surface, the screen illuminating with a name, Lucas Hartwell. The name meant nothing to him. Mason glanced at the bathroom door. The shower was still running. He could hear her humming softly, a song she always loved. He told himself to look away. His own parents had built a marriage on invisible walls, on checking phones and finding nothing, on trust so fragile it shattered at the slightest touch. He was not his father. But the phone buzzed again. Then again. Something in Mason's chest tightened, a small coil of tension that he tried to ignore. He picked up the phone. Just to silence it, he thought. Just to put it face down so it wouldn't disturb her. Instead, he read the message. "When do I get to see you again?" Mason's hands went cold. He told himself it meant nothing. A friend. A colleague. Someone from her past. But then he scrolled up, his thumb moving with a will of its own, reading words that cracked open his carefully constructed world. "I can't stop thinking about you. That night changed everything for me. What if you hadn't gotten married? What if?" The messages continued, and with each word, Mason felt something inside him dying. The shower had stopped. Catherine would be coming out soon, drying her hair, moving back into their bed, perhaps to make love to him again with the same lips that had kissed someone else. Mason's hands shook as he read the final message, sent just yesterday from Lucas. "I wish it was you here with me instead. I wish you had chosen me." The phone slipped from his fingers. When Catherine emerged, radiant and unsuspecting, Mason was sitting in the dark on the balcony. She found him there, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Mason, are you okay?" He couldn't answer. He couldn't look at her. Because if he did, he might break, and he needed to hold himself together long enough to understand what was happening. Long enough to decide what it meant that his wife, had a secret. A deep, thorough secret that involved someone named Lucas who wished she had chosen him instead. Mason excused himself, claiming jet lag. Catherine seemed disappointed but didn't push. She fell asleep before him, and Mason lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, his mind a chaos of questions and pain. By morning, something had shifted inside him. The shock had crystallized into a kind of clarity. If she could keep this from him, if she could lie by omission, letting him believe in a marriage built on honesty, then what else was false? Every touch felt like a betrayal. Every kiss felt like a lie wrapped in tenderness. He watched her throughout the day, trying to see her clearly. Catherine seemed almost unnaturally happy, unaware that her world was about to collapse. And Mason made a decision that would echo through both their lives forever. The public unraveling. Mason didn't confront Catherine directly. Instead, he did something that came from a place of pain so profound he could barely recognize himself. He took screenshots of the messages. Every single one. Then he opened the group chat with his closest friends, the ones they had invited to the wedding, the ones who had celebrated with them just days ago. In that chat, he posted the screenshots with one line, "My wife has been lying to me. These messages are from before our wedding. I thought you should know what she's really like." His finger hovered over the button. He knew, even then, that pressing send would change everything. It would turn their private shame into public spectacle. It would transform their intimate betrayal into something that would follow Catherine for years, whispered about at parties, joked about in conversation. He pressed send anyway. The notifications came quickly. Shocked emojis. Questions. The screenshots spreading like a virus through every phone that mattered. Within an hour, Mason's sister Isabella was calling, her voice shrill with concern and anger. "What were you thinking?" she demanded. "You've just destroyed her." "She destroyed me," Mason said, and heard the ice in his own voice. But Isabella wasn't finished. "You destroyed yourself. And her. Together." Catherine's father was already booking a flight. Her mother had seen the messages and had apparently taken to bed, devastated that her daughter had engaged in infidelity before even reaching the altar. The narrative had shifted in hours. It was no longer a private betrayal, it was a public humiliation. Catherine had become the cautionary tale, the girl who couldn't be faithful even on her honeymoon, the girl who broke her marriage vows before they even dried on paper. Catherine herself didn't know at first. Mason watched her scroll through her phone, watch her face go pale, watch her hands begin to shake as the reality crashed down on her. "You did this," she whispered, reading his name attached to the screenshots, the timestamps, the proof. Mason had never seen her look at him like that before. The hurt in her eyes was almost biblical in its depth. "You didn't even ask me," Catherine said quietly. "You didn't give me a chance to explain. You just exposed everything. To everyone we know." "You lied to me," Mason said, but his own voice sounded hollow now. "No," Catherine said. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake, yes. But you've turned my mistake into a public execution." For the first time since reading those messages, Mason began to understand what he had done. It wasn't justice. It was revenge. It was two people so deep in their own pain that they couldn't see each other anymore. Mason returned to the city alone. Catherine stayed on the island for 2 more days before packing her things, the villa that had been meant to be romantic now feeling like a tomb of broken promises. They communicated only through lawyers after that. The divorce was simple in its logistics, devastating in its reality. They split their shared apartment, divided their wedding gifts, untangled the life they had spent 3 years building together. What was harder was navigating the social fallout. Mason found himself isolated in unexpected ways. Friends who had been shocked and supportive suddenly looked at him differently, as though he too was to blame. Women he had dated casually before Catherine now wouldn't return his calls. At his office, whispers followed him through hallways. The man who had publicly shamed his wife might have had reasons, people seemed to think, but the method felt cruel. Catherine had disappeared. Not literally, she had moved back in with her parents, taken a leave of absence from her job as a museum curator. But she had withdrawn from the world, untagging herself from social media, avoiding mutual friends, essentially erasing the public version of herself that had been so thoroughly dismantled. Mason would occasionally see photos of her, posted by her father or her mother, a a figure in the background at family gatherings, always looking away from the camera. She had become a ghost haunting the edges of the life they had shared. One day, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Mason received an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the paper expensive and cream-colored, the handwriting unmistakably Catherine's. Mason, I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did before our wedding was wrong, and I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it. Lucas and I had a brief affair that ended 3 months before you and I met. When you asked me if there was anyone in my past who could still hurt us, I should have told you the truth. Instead, I pretended it never happened. I convinced myself that if I didn't speak about it, it wouldn't be real. But it was real. And when you found those messages I should never have responded to in the first place, you had every right to be angry. You had every right to feel betrayed. What I didn't have the right to is to live with what you did next. You could have talked to me. You could have demanded honesty. Instead, you decided my shame should be public, and in doing so, you became the person I could never have imagined you becoming. I'm not writing to excuse myself. I'm writing to tell you that I've spent the last 6 months in therapy, trying to understand why I made the choices I did. And I've realized something. We were both broken before we got married. You were terrified of losing me. I was terrified of being truly seen. We were two people wearing masks, and when the masks came off, we didn't know how to love what was underneath. I don't hate you anymore. I just feel sad for what we lost. Catherine. Mason read the letter 17 times. He memorized the curve of her handwriting, the places where she had paused, pressing the pen harder into the paper. He found himself crying, not with the sharp, explosive tears of grief, but with the slow, steady tears of regret. Where broken things go to heal. 1 year later, Mason stood outside a coffee shop in the part of the city where Catherine had grown up. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, imagining every way it could go wrong. She might refuse to see him. She might have moved on completely, found someone else, someone worthy of the love she had offered him so freely. But when she walked in, her eyes found his immediately, as though some part of her had known he would be there. Catherine had changed in the year apart. There was a quietness to her now, a kind of hard-won peace that hadn't been there before. Her hair was shorter, falling just past her shoulders in waves that caught the afternoon light. She wore a simple blue dress, and when she sat across from him at the small table he had chosen, Mason found himself unable to speak. "Hello," Catherine said finally, and her voice was gentle, not cold as he had feared. "I've thought about you every day," Mason said. "Every single day." "I know," Catherine replied. "I've thought about you too." They talked for 3 hours. Mason apologized not once but many times, each apology deeper than the last. He told Catherine about therapy, about the anger management classes he had taken, about the long, difficult work of understanding why he had lashed out so cruelly. Catherine listened, and when he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "I forgive you," she said. "I forgave you months ago. I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." They left the coffee shop as the sun began to set, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. Mason walked Catherine to her car, and as they stood on the quiet street, he asked if he could see her again. "I'd like that," Catherine said. Their second date was dinner. Their third was a walk through the botanical gardens where they had first met. By the 5th date, when Mason kissed her, it felt like a homecoming, tentative, questioning, but filled with the possibility of beginning again. 3 months later, Mason brought Catherine back to a beach house, not the island that held so much pain, but a different place, a place where the ocean was softer and the light fell differently. They made love that night with the kind of tenderness that comes from knowing exactly what you have lost and understanding its true value. "I'm scared," Catherine whispered afterward, her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. "Of what?" Mason asked, stroking her hair. "That we'll make the same mistakes. That you'll find a reason to be angry, and I'll find a reason to hide. That we'll break each other again." Mason shifted so that he could look into her eyes. In them, he saw all the hurt they had caused each other, but he also saw hope. Fragile, tentative hope. "We might make other mistakes," he said. "New ones. But we'll make them together, and we'll talk about them. I won't ever shut you out again. And you won't hide from me. We'll be honest, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Catherine kissed him then, deeply and slowly, a kiss that tasted like apology and forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. They made love again, their bodies moving together with a knowledge earned through pain and recovery. When she cried out his name, it wasn't in the frantic way of new love, it was in the way of people who have found their way home after being lost. Later, as they lay intertwined in the darkness, Catherine said something that Mason thought he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Broken things can sometimes be put back together. Not the same as they were, but beautiful in their brokenness. Like kintsugi. Like what? Mason asked. The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, Catherine explained. The cracks don't disappear. They become the most beautiful part of the piece. Mason held her closer, understanding finally that their story wasn't about perfection or unspoiled trust. It was about two people who had broken each other and then, with tremendous courage and patience, had learned how to love the wounded versions of themselves. As the ocean waves crashed softly against the beach below, and Catherine slept with her head on his shoulder, Mason realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones that break and are mended, scars and all.